Hi everybody. I hope you can hear us well. Thank you for making it to today's session. My name is Alexandru Lazar. I'm Program Officer at the CyberPeace Institute. And today I have the pleasure to welcome you to our panel on data responsibility, rethinking do no harm with a digital lens. I would also like to welcome the people online. Please do let us know if you can hear us properly and if everything is working okay. And today I would like to introduce you to our experts, to our panelists, starting with Maëv de France, Head of Programs at CartONG, followed by Giulio Coppi, Senior Humanitarian Officer at Access Now, then Sabina Titarenko, as well, Director Network Development and Partnerships at ISS General Secretariat, and finally, Fabian Leingruber, Senior Program Manager at the CyberPeace Institute. Now, you might ask yourselves what's connecting these different people? Why are they around this table and online? Just to provide you some context, I met Maëv almost 2 years ago during a workshop online presenting the Institute and what we do for a bunch of NGOs. And what connected us with Maëv and what connects us all here today, it's the fact that we try to have a human-centered approach in the work that we do, a responsible approach in terms of the awareness, the work, the way we manage data, the way we manage, let's say, our programs and engagements with NGOs. And I think this is quite valuable, but I will not take too much more time on my side, and I will give the floor to Maëv to start the panel. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Alex. So the idea also is to connect this session with a session that occurred last week remotely that I'm sure some of you attended, that was organized by the Responsible Data Working Group. And I want to start with a definition that they have around responsible data. So data responsibility in humanitarian action is the safe, ethical and effective management of personal and non-personal data for operational response in accordance with established frameworks for personal data protection. And one of the things that connects us, and you might be, as Alex was saying, surprised to see people working on cybersecurity, on data, with a more network approach in terms of data working all together. So we really consider that it's important to take quite a wide definition of what data is and responsible data. Can you switch the next slide? And in terms of data responsibility, we really want to encourage, in the same way that the Responsible Data Working Group has for a number of years, to look at beyond the data protection legal angle, but really take a do no harm approach. And I mean, on the CartONG side, we work a lot with humanitarian NGOs. So this is usually the angle that we take to interest people in terms of risk management also related to data protection. The do no harm is not just in the digital world a question about not sharing a password. It's a much more englobing approach. And the way that I try and formalize this responsible data approach is this visual that you see where we're talking of data confidentiality, and this is often what we see as the main thing in terms of data protection, that and data security. But it's also a question of data quality and of data literacy to ensure that all the actors that are working with data actually understand each other, that the data we're talking about is reliable, because there's no point in collecting, sharing data that is not understood and that is not of good quality. And why is it a new topic in this digital era? First of all, because the digitization of data makes the topic much more complex and risk prone, and we see it in particular when you talk about like cyber risks, and I'm sure Fabien will talk about this in much more detail. And there's a lot more, I mean, the topic is much more transversal than it used to be. So obviously it's always a question that's of interest to monitoring and evaluation specialists, to program people, but more and more like IT and security teams are getting interested in the topic. And it's important that everybody speaks the same language when we're talking about data protection. So our angle is to try and focus as much as possible on very practical tools because we've realized that a lot of the vocabulary around data protection and all of the tools and the approaches are often quite scary. And it's usually, as we say in French, the patate chaude, the hot potato that nobody wants to tackle. So we try and make it a bit more digestible, this potato, adding a lot of mayonnaise to it, composed of very many different ingredients to make it more accessible and get people sort of engaged in the topic. And in the fall, I organized, well, maybe before I talk about the training, just to show you in practice these three different angles of confidentiality, security, quality, and literacy, what it means for me. So you see like the data management cycle, maybe in pretty small, but just to, without covering the full cycle and obviously giving you tips on each and every one of these, just to show you on the aspect of like when you're sharing and receiving feedback around your data, which is a key step of the data process, what it means in terms of confidentiality to start off with. So obviously you're only going to share data with authorized staff. You're also going to de-identify it to make sure that the data that's shared is shared to the right level and with the right people. You're going to minimize the data that you're sharing. On the security side, you're going to make sure that the platform that you use is secure, that you have proper data sharing SOPs that you're respecting and such. But then on the quality side, you're also making sure that the data you're sharing is high quality by getting at this step feedback either from the communities, the local communities on which the data is, and also more widely the community of actors that might be working on the same topic in the same area and therefore have interesting elements, their own data collections that can help triangulate the data. So quality is also part of this. And then literacy, if you're sharing data that those communities and the other actors don't understand, there isn't much point. So it's also part of our responsibility as data actors, and we're all data actors, even if we often don't assume, sorry, that's a French word, we don't accept that we're data people. We also need to make sure that there's the sort of basic understanding of data that's available and there throughout the different roles. And then just to share a few insights, because I gave in the fall a training to 12 different humanitarian NGOs. We had like 250 participants remotely from 61 countries, specifically on responsible data. And it was really interesting in the survey to capture needs, what came out. It wasn't all about super secure platforms, artificial intelligence, biometrics and such. It was much more about very simple things like how do we archive, destroy data that we've collected? How are the roles and responsibilities in my organization set up or should be set up to ensure that program teams work well with data teams, M&E teams, IT, so that the whole system works well? Because basically in terms of data protection, it's usually your weakest link that's going to maybe lead to a data breach. So it's this weakest link that you also need to work on. And maybe then just to share a few challenges. Well, before I share the challenges, some of the situations that were shared by participants, just to give you a bit of a concrete humanitarian elements. So we still have situations in the sector where photos of beneficiaries are shared without consent. Disinformation campaigns are more and more frequent. We see it in particular in the Ukraine context. Beneficiary databases of more than 10 years that are still on servers haven't been deleted. The sharing of sensitive data with personal emails. We saw a recruitment test with a real beneficiary database that was nearly shared in the area where the recruitment was planned. And obviously this was very, very sensitive data. So a lot of reflexes, without going into each one of these post-its, but a lot of the reflexes, even in humanitarian NGOs, of whom like do no harm is the DNA. In the digital translation of that, there are still some missing links. And sometimes it comes out like the digital version of forms, people are sort of very focused. They have to be anonymized, secure, but then the paper versions of all this are available in the medical center very freely in the corridor. So there's a lot of connection of dots that still needs to be done. And yeah, just to finish on the challenges, as we want to leave the floor open to a lot of discussion after, so we're trying all to be very brief in our presentations. So some of the challenges that I saw through the work I've done on responsible data over the years, I really believe that it can only work if there's this cross-disciplinary data literacy culture and digital literacy culture. We see it in particular with cybersecurity type of risks. If you don't have the basic digital culture, it's usually what's going to lead to data breach. It's that one staff that's not going to know about phishing, not phishing like this, but I'll let our cybersecurity experts explain later, who's going to be that weakest link. It's not going to be the super secure double authentication system that you set up to secure your data. Then for us, the priority now, even if NGOs, international NGOs still have a lot of work, it's also the question of local NGOs and local actors that do not have the resources, that do not have the training, and often that are sort of the last element in the chain. And they often don't have all these responsible data reflexes. So it's also our responsibility as a sector, as international NGOs, to support them in the building of their culture in terms of responsible data, as they're often the ones that are closest to the most sensitive data. Thirdly, there's still a gap between technological possibilities and human capacities. So there's still, in the responsible data chains, a lot of elements that are missing, like systems where it's really easy to automate processes for archiving of data. Very few NGOs use these, and so we sort of need to make this easier, build documentation support, making sure that technologies are there to do that. Also, anonymization. Everybody thinks it's a very easy process. Well, everybody, meaning most people who don't know much about the topic, but it's an incredibly technical and difficult one in reality. And lastly, NGOs today, and Giulio will talk more about this after, they have less and less leeway on these topics these days because technology-driven approaches pushed by donors and the innovation thrive raises many questions, but it basically means also that NGOs are very much dependent on the tools, much more than they could have been a decade ago. And in case you're interested in some of the resources that were part of the training, we have a learning corner on a website called the importal.org that you can see up on the screen, where we made all the training material of that training we did last year available, as well as many tip sheets, responsible data toolbox and such. So I'll stop there, but if you have questions, of course, don't hesitate.
Thank you very much, Maya. That was super insightful. And just to remind everybody that after all the speakers, all the panelists are going to present their slides, we're going to do a small Kahoot just to keep you engaged and see what you're going away from this session. Then we're going to have some time for some questions and answers as well. But without taking too much time, I'm going to give the floor to Giulio from Access Now, just to take you through some of his work in the past few years. Giulio, back to you.
Thank you. I think we can only share one at a time, but you can keep sharing on your side. It's fine. It's just a couple of slides anyway. I think, thank you. And thanks, Maeve, for giving me a perfect segue to introduce the work that Access Now has been doing and the research that we have been leading on humanitarian technology. I took a couple of notes just to make sure that I bridge correctly to your points, a couple of points that were raised before. First of all, Access Now has been monitoring the technological side of humanitarian action because it links straight into the mandate of expanding and protecting digital rights for everyone. And increasingly, conflict and digital rights are intertwined and interdependent. They build on each other. Our conflicts, the conflicts that we live at all the levels, from the full-blown war to the small local episode of violence, are now streamed, covered online, debated on social media. They rely on connectivity and technology for aid, for assistance, for mapping, for information gathering, increasingly so as communities get connected. More and more communities fortunately get connected, and unfortunately disconnected. So that's also why we track the technological impact in humanitarian crisis. And we led this research that took several months. And we went through over 400 resources, and we interviewed between 40 and 50 experts to draft a very long document that we'll put in the chat for those who are online, and those who are in the room are very happy to go through. The participants and my colleagues who are there. If you need direct access to the document, it's on our website, Private Tech and Humanitarian Mapping. It's a long work, a long document, and I try to summarize, jumping from the 4 different buckets that we analyze, from data collection to the connectivity issue and the cybersecurity, through the connection with the database, so the digital ID and the biometrics, and finally the cloud, advanced analytics, and AI. And we boil down to a few conclusions. But just to bridge with what I have said, why this is important. In my past life, I've also worked in digital transformation, and there are a couple of issues that jumped at me when I was doing that work. One of these was that I think it was my first week on the job, I got asked to screen an app or a system that were proposed for one of our regional offices to do data sharing of protection cases. You can imagine it kind of rings all sorts of red flags and alarms immediately. And when I opened the document, I noticed that there was an Excel file attached to the proposal and the digital architecture of the system. And it was like a sample, but it was a sample of the archive of the database. There were real names in there. Like, it was a sample of the real database of protection cases. So yeah, panic immediately, raising up to the data protection person, nuking the computer, the memory, everything, trying to destroy it, trace it back, who had access to it, and then going back to the organizers from the other organization that proposed it to flag the bad practice. So this goes back a long time, and it gets more and more important, as I said, as we rely on technology. So one of the issues that were mentioned before, the deletion of archives, is something that you don't stop thinking until you need it. And the truth is, for example, that why technology matters is because a lot of the systems that are sold to NGOs, local charities, and even big NGOs are not designed to do bulk deletion of data. They just do not offer that option. If you want to delete records, you have to do it one by one. So if you want to go back 24, 25, 15 years and delete everything that has been collected from 10 years onward, you cannot do that. So there are technical and technological roadblocks to be compliant that we need to be aware of. So in this report, we analyzed companies, mostly medium to big, because those are the most present across the different crises, and we got to a few conclusions. I highlighted a couple of those just for the sake of rapidity. The first one is hybridization, that I won't spend too much time, but it's basically the issue that tech companies are now taking over essential humanitarian functions, and humanitarian organizations, a few of them at least, are taking over tech functions. So they are setting up their own tech teams, they do development, they do cloud hosting sometimes, in the case of UNICC systems. So they are becoming, in a way, tech companies. Neither one of the two groups are taking over the responsibilities that come with the job. So the humanitarian actor are not taking over the business and human rights framework that companies are supposed to respond to, and tech companies doing humanitarian services are not taking over the humanitarian principles and frameworks. So if we move to the next slide, I tried to boil down and simplify, put a little bit of, not for name and shaming, but just to have an idea about what are we talking about. Some of the findings have been grouped here in this kind of graph into what happens when you have this kind of data process that extract the data, then commodify it, and then results in data surveillance, which is the surveillance through data systems. It results that basically you have a concentration of entities that are both active in producing tech and handling technology and delivering direct aid provision. These groups are in the same bubble. They're getting cozier, they're getting closer. And some INGOs are getting closer to that small groups. But that also means, and we can move to the next slide, that the data is extracted from the local communities, it mingles into very few systems, and then it goes down in a couple of buckets. It basically trickle up, and it get increasingly concentrated in a sort of pyramid scheme. It goes from a lot of actors nibbling at people's data at the bottom, and then it kind of thins out until you get to the top of the pyramid, where you basically have mostly Microsoft Cloud and Microsoft services for most of the UN and humanitarian INGO system, and potentially in the future, the UN cloud computing system that is launching their new servers. And this is, I wouldn't say necessarily a problem, but this is something that we need to take into consideration when we think about where is this data going? How do I keep track of it? How do I protect it? Where is the best place for communities to access that data? What kind of mechanisms do they have to access it? So all the guidelines and protocols that we set up cannot ignore the reality of the data architecture and the technological relationship between the technological structure and strategy adopted by both humanitarians and companies. And this also means that in the future, if we go towards a kind of data-owned or humanitarian-owned data ecosystem, as it looks to be the case in the case of the cloud computing system of the UN, that will be outside of any kind of jurisdiction. We do not have the policies right now to deal with that. How will, for example, a small NGO or a local authority or an individual from a community get access to their data, see what kind of data do they own? How do they activate those rights? At this day, we don't have an answer for that. Like, there are no mechanisms that you can use to access your data once they're outside of the jurisdiction. You cannot go to a judge because that will be protected by the privileges and immunities of the UN system. So how do we do that? How do we execute and implement those rights that are on paper on the guidelines and resources that Maya spoke about? This is why the work that we have done flags a set of problems and also recommendations that I invite you all to discuss with me whenever you want. Thanks, and giving back to the room.
Thank you, Giulio. That was super insightful. And again, we're going to have very soon time for questions, but I will give the floor to Sabina from International Social Service. Sabina?
Yes, thank you. I think you can go directly to the next slide. So I will present a bit our organization and just explain you how we are data responsible and how we manage the personal data. But let me just introduce you briefly our organization. So we are an international NGO presented in more than 120 countries. We were founded in Geneva in 1924, so we are celebrating our centennial anniversary this year. And we have more than 600 social workers, lawyers, and other professionals working worldwide and supporting more than 75,000 families per year globally. So the ISS General Secretariat that I'm representing today is based in Geneva and is in charge of developing and strengthening the operational capacity of the network. So we encourage knowledge and best practice sharing among members. We do advocacy at international level, and we coordinate international projects related to the main ISS topics. And when I'm talking about the ISS network, I'm talking about our members, which are mainly NGOs and governmental authorities, who has really like different like a huge variety of the profiles, and they provide social, psychosocial, and legal services related to child and adult protection across borders. So our main beneficiaries are migrating children and families. You can go to the next slide. And so when I'm talking about the cross-border social work, I mean that, of course, we understand that there are like migration flows, and those are complex family issues that involve 2 or 3 countries in the question. So the collaboration between our members allow us to provide those services that you see on your slides. It's about child protection, providing social reports on child welfare, and so on and so forth. So you see the on your slide, on the slide. And so this collaboration of professionals really include, of course, the management of the personal data of our beneficiaries, and management of this data is across borders. Yeah. So here I wanted to have a closer look to a couple of examples on how the data is managed in our network. So just to give you a brief background, we had launched a survey last year to our members, and because we want to draft a data protection policy, a new data protection policy. And so we asked real practitioners, so we asked real social workers dealing with beneficiaries to answer those questions that are that can be quite like technical, but then like we gathered their insights and their opinions actually. So here you see that we compared Lebanon, Senegal, and the UK. And our partner in the UK, you see, they follow GDPR. They have several policies, procedures, like software, IT support, like even legal advice on some like questions related to data sharing, data storing. So they are quite like well developed, and they follow like concrete procedures in place in the UK. And when we talk about the Lebanon and Senegal, you see that in Lebanon they do not have a national legislation, but they chose themselves to follow the GDPR. And in Senegal, you see that they have a national law on protection of personal data. And when we are talking about like methods of sharing personal data, you see that in the UK, they do password protected documents. They anonymize the data shared. They encrypt the messages when sharing personal documents. But in Lebanon, they protect their emails by passwords while sharing personal data. And in Senegal, they just share this information by emails without any password protection, because it's not their way to manage the cases. And the same goes for the consent. For example, in the UK and in Lebanon, you see that there is a written consent for processing and storing personal data, and in Senegal, they do it orally. So some interesting points here is that Senegal mentioned as data protection challenges, they mentioned that there is low awareness in West Africa. So just to explain you, our partner in Senegal, it is a regional network of 15 local partners in 15 countries of West Africa. And so for them, even though their like main office, they understand the data responsibility and the importance of protecting personal data, and they do not really, they cannot really impose their local partners sometimes. They try to improve the communication with them, but sometimes it's really like it's just not their practice in those countries. And actually, same goes for the UK. They mentioned the same, like cooperation with partners in other countries sometimes can be challenging, because they have, in the UK, they have so many different like high requirements, and it's really hard to push other people in other countries to follow those requirements. An interesting point that I didn't mention on the slide is actually linked to what Giulio said, is that data retention time. We asked about how long do you save the data, and then you delete it. And some of our members responded that there is no legal limit for them to store the data. So some of them, they have a legal limit of 5 to 10 years. But actually, many of our organizations mentioned that the files that are linked to the files of adoption, so the files of the adoption of children, they should be kept indefinitely or like for 100 years. So this is just an interesting point that even we should really differentiate the type of personal data that we are talking about, because if we are talking about, for example, as here, of adoption, here we should really look into the legislation in the country, because it is important to keep this information actually for the longest possible. So why I'm presenting actually this here is that just to show you more the diversity in the world and the diversity of understanding the data responsibility. But at least from my experience of working with our members, I can already say that there is a common understanding of having the minimum standards, the minimum requirements, and there is also an understanding that we need to develop a really comprehensive data protection policy. And also there is also an understanding that regular training on cybersecurity and cybersecurity awareness and data responsibilities really needed, because they are local NGOs. They do not have the access to like high-level IT support or having cybersecurity officers in their team. So you can go to the next slide. I will not go through this. It's just again, through our survey, we just wanted to see where we are at as a network of understanding what data breach risks there are, and we see that there is a common understanding and common understanding of the risks, and the more you are aware of these risks, the more you are prepared, and at least you can, how we did actually, and we really appreciate the partnership with the CyberPeace Institute, so we really recognize this need thanks to the partnership with the CyberPeace Institute, and they also helped us to develop the training on cybersecurity awareness. They have a program of CyberPeace builders about which Fabien will talk later in a bit. So we really appreciate this cooperation, that an NGO helping other NGOs to raise awareness about the data protection and cybersecurity, but also doing it pro bono, let's say. So yeah, you can go to the next slide. So it just actually, as we have it in the title of our session, I asked these questions to our partners in these three countries. What is do no harm for you? And you see that the UK responded that it is safe management, storing and sharing of personal data, and it's just not to cause harm to any stakeholders that can arise as a direct or indirect result of sharing the data. And an interesting point here, maybe it can then fit in our discussion later, is the point of Senegal, of our member in Senegal, saying that the principle of do no harm is not considered for them as a minimum standard. So they see that the data protection is already in itself includes already this concept of do no harm. So we do not have to really talk about it separately, but this is their understanding. Yes, thank you very much.
Thank you, Sabina. Then let's go ahead to give the floor to Fabien from the CyberPeace Institute to tell you a bit about the work we do there and the CyberPeace Builders program. Thank you.
Thanks all of you. I will bring you a little bit more on the operational point of view, talking of cybersecurity. And I just want to start to share some finding of a research that was conducted last year, just to give you some statistics and information. And starting with cyber attack. Maëv said it very well. You have different elements to consider. You have security, you have confidentiality, you have data literacy, but there is different challenges here also about attack. Just want to focus, for example, on ransomware. I'm sure you're all aware of ransomware. So it's a malware that once activated on an IT system, block everything. Everything is encrypted. And you're asked to pay a ransom to unlock the files. But what's happening today is that you have what we call double extortion. So once your system is infected, the cyber criminal, they escape the data from your systems and they publish it on the dark web. So you have a warning, if you don't pay, the data will be published. So that's the first challenges in Do No Harm. We saw that there's the importance of protecting the data of the beneficiary, of the partners, of the staff, etc. But what if everything ends up on the dark web due to a cyber attack? The reason of the cyber attack, there are multiple. I'll come back on that a little bit later, but that's the real consequences. It has an operational impact on organization. When you look today at cyber attack against private companies, usually it ends up on the news and people said, oh, okay, fair enough, they're unlucky, they don't put enough money, maybe this is an impact on the shareholder, but that's it. When you target a humanitarian organization, it's quite different. There is a real impact on the ground. There is people that need assistance, that need support from the humanitarian organization that may lose access to such a support due to a cyber attack. Another small example is what we call a DDoS. It's a distributed denial of services. Maybe you also heard about that. It's a cyber attack that had the idea to flood an IT resources with a lot of data of request and block the systems. So usually you do that on a website, and the consequence is that you cannot access anymore the website. So when you say it like that, it seems, okay, and what if you just access the website or the resource later? But think of different situation. Maybe you are running an organization that help women that are threatened, that are targeted, and you have key resources available online. Maybe you have the position of water point that people can access in time of a crisis. What if suddenly your resources are not available anymore due to a cyber attack? It has a direct consequences on the beneficiary and the population you are trying to help as an organization. And that's all consequences due to cyber attack. So people also have to understand, and it was very well said in the presentation also before, that cyber is not only in cyber. Cyber has consequences on the ground, and that need to be taken down. You can look at the different statistics we have here, but a lot of the NGO we were working with in Geneva got hit by different cyber attacks. They face data leak, they face leak of credentials that end up into the dark web, that are available to cyber criminals, that are available to anyone who has the possibility to go into the dark web. But at the same time, you can see that not a lot of organizations have cybersecurity budget. It was said before, I mean, donors are more and more looking to get data-driven reports, data-driven data to support the action, etc. But at the same time, donors, most of the time, they are looking to get fancy pictures of how they are helping people on the ground, of food distribution, or how they are training children, etc. But no one is really interested to put money into the back office, supporting IT support, cybersecurity support. The same consequences with the money is the impact on the staff. If you don't have money to support your IT, your back office function, how can you hire cybersecurity talent? Next year, it's an estimation that there will be 3.5 million open positions in cybersecurity that will not fill any person that match the criteria. So how can humanitarian actors compete with the private sector? Simply look here in Geneva. I mean, you have so many international organizations, NGO hosted here in Geneva, versus so many private banks and corporations that pay different salaries. How can you attract talent and get support? So that's a real challenge. On the next slide, I just want to showcase a bit the challenges of the digitalization. You said it very well. I mean, most of the NGO need to digitalize their operation. If you go to a migrant camp today, most of the staff use a tablet, use an iPad to collect information about the migrant, where they are coming from, what they need, etc., etc. But so if you increase so much what we call the digital surface, you also increase the attack surface. The more and more you use digital technology to deliver services, it means the more and more you're exposed on the internet. You're exposed on the cloud, etc. So at some point, you need to come up with a solution. At the CyberPeace Institute, we really had this mission to reduce the harm of cyber attack on vulnerable communities. But we are not a bank. So it means we cannot tackle the challenges of money. We cannot give money out to other non-profit to improve their own cybersecurity. We are also a small team, so we don't have a lot of resources to help them with cybersecurity. So there should be something that have to be made. And we came out with the idea that cyber talent, they exist. Even if there's a huge gap, there is cybersecurity experts around the world. But where are they today? They are employed by private companies. So Julio said us that about this responsibility of private company into the cyber world. So let's make the private company accountable or involved in the process to help the ones that are the most vulnerable. And that's why we came out with this concept called the CyberPeace Builders. So the idea is to say, on one side, you have cyber experts. You will take out the cyber expert from cyber company or big companies that have cybersecurity teams and resources, and you will use these people to help non-profit organizations around the world on concrete stuff. And when you look at cybersecurity, you have a lot of norm, you have ISO, you have NIST in the US, etc. But when you look at SME, small non-profit organization, they are focusing on helping the most vulnerable. They are focusing on delivering critical services on the ground. So you cannot expect from them to be top-notch on all this cybersecurity policy, approach, norm, etc. So we had to find a way to help them on concrete mission, concrete example. So we created a list of 33 different cyber engagement, going from literacy, training, helping the organization to do phishing campaign, not indeed, as you said, not the good phishing in the lake, but sending out fake emails and explaining to the staff how to react when they detect a fake email. Because you know, when you talk of security, cybersecurity, it's always three aspects. It's people, technology, and process. So you cannot only rely on one of them, you need the three of them. Do no harm is also a combination of different factors. So if you are able to help the non-profit organization, the humanitarian actor on key aspects of cybersecurity, you will already reduce a lot the attack surface and their own exposure. So I will close on that because I know we are a bit short on time, but I welcome anyone that is interested as a non-profit to join the program, and you will have these three different aspects. So we start with an assessment of the posture, the cybersecurity maturity of the NGO, the organization. We engage the NGO in what we call our cyber threat intelligence program. So we look at the different asset, digital asset, if they are targeted by cyber attack or not. And then we engage a cohort of volunteers, the cyber volunteer coming for cooperation, into helping this NGO. So if you are interested to join on this aspect, thanks Alex, simply go on our website of the program, it's cpb.ngo, cyberpeacebuilder.ngo, cpb.ngo, focusing just on this program, and we welcome any non-profit organization to join us for free to access our Mattermost platform, where we have a community of cyber representatives of non-profit organization. And of course, you're working for company or other association, please feel free also to see how you can have social impact with your companies into the program. Thanks a lot. Give you back the floor, Alex.
Thank you, Fabien, and thank you all for your attention this far. We are going to switch things up a bit now. We're going to launch a small Kahoot, and we really hope you're going to participate just to see a bit what are some of the main takeaways that you're going to get after this session. And of course, then we can further debate them, further discuss them, and we're also going to open the floor for questions and answers. I'm just going to take 30 seconds to set up the Kahoot for you, and then we can launch this. Thank you. Okay, perfect. We do invite everybody in the room and also people online to just pick up your mobile phones, scan the QR code, and log directly into the Kahoot, or you can just visit kahoot.it and then use the pin to enter the Kahoot game. You'll see it's going to be quite engaging. The questions are going to be quite interesting, really focusing on what we discussed here today. I would like to take again the chance to thank Sabina, Mae, Fabien, and Giulio for their intervention this far. And we'll really look forward to also getting your input, your experiences, your questions after this small, let's say, invigorating Kahoot game to get you more involved. Thank you. Let's take maybe 15, 20 seconds so that all the people can connect. Thanks. Okay, I think we're good to go. I'm going to launch the first question. You'll see you have 30 seconds to answer. After each question, there is going to be a scoreboard, but don't worry, we're only going to look at the scoreboard at the end of the session. And the top 3 people on that scoreboard, I would really appreciate if you could stand up, if that's okay, and maybe share a bit your experiences around data protection, around cyber, if you want, of course, no pressure, but that would really enrich the discussion that we have today. So let's go.
No one wants to win now.
Yeah, oops, what happened? Okay. Let's go.
You should say that at the end of the session.
Exactly.
No, but it can serve as motivation. No? Okay. Okay, first question is, what is data responsibility? You'll see you have 4 answers and 30 seconds to respond. And let's see. Okay, perfect. Really well done. The big majority did provide the right answer. So data responsibility is the safe, ethical, and effective management of personal and non-personal data. Well done, everyone. Let's go to the next question. And the next question is going to be, what can be considered as a bad practice of data processing? If you remember, I've discussed this at the beginning of the session. Is it just one? Is it all of them? Is it, what might it be? And yes, all answers apply. And all answers are cyber attacks, freezing information systems, sharing of sensitive data with personal emails, and photos of beneficiaries shared without actual consent from the beneficiaries, which is more of a common practice than we might think of it. And it's something that we should be very careful. Consent is a priority, and it should be always explicitly requested or written or expressed, so that then you can actually process the information or the image of that respective individual. Now, let's go to the next question. Again, the scoreboard, we are going to go back to it in a moment. Let's see, what's the next question? So this one asks you, what does do no harm mean in the context of data protection? Is it not releasing sensitive data on beneficiaries, considering potential risks for all stakeholders in all data handling processes or phases, not sharing sensitive data on staff, or protecting vulnerable individuals from their own data, from their data? Which one might it be? Well done. I really thought this one is going to be trickier, but no, really top notch. You did pay attention during the session. So it is, do no harm means in the context of data protection, the consideration of potential risks for all stakeholders in all the phases of data handling. Well done. Now we're going to see again the scoreboard, but we're moving on. We don't pay too much attention to it. We're just halfway through. Now, this comes from Julio's intervention, and it asks you, humanitarian actors are increasingly engaging in tech projects. Is this something true? Is it false? If you remember, is this something that Julio mentioned? Is it... Yeah. Nice one.
Maybe the slides were made with ChatGPT.
Surprise. Who doesn't?
Sorry, Julio.
Yes, and it is true. Well done, everyone. This one was very straightforward as well. Let's move on to question number 5. We're getting very close to the end. Now, this one is asking you, and it's coming now from both Sabina's and Fab's interventions. What is a data breach? How can we define it? Is it data that is leaked on the dark web, data that is modified or altered, unauthorized access to confidential information, or hackers that sell data online? And do, when you have the time, have a look for the dark web price index. You'd be absolutely amazed how much it costs to maybe get, you know, the number, your social security number, or a credit card number, or all the prices are there for any kind and any type of data. And well done. Yes, it is unauthorized access to confidential information. That is the right answer. Let's move forward. Then we have again the scoreboard. Question number 6 now. Now, based on Fabian's intervention, what are the top 3 cyber attacks on non-profits? Is it phishing, ransomware, DDoS, distributed denial of service, man-in-the-middle, cross-scripting, or an intrusion, CEO scams, website defacement, impersonation, or prompt injections, deepfakes, and AI-powered phishing, since we were just mentioning ChatGPT earlier on? And yes, well done. It is the phishing, ransomware, and DDoS. Now, we're getting very, very close to the final few questions of this Kahoot. And this question now is asking you, how many NGOs have been the victim of a data breach in Geneva in 2023? You have different values?
That's a hard one.
Yeah, but it was in the slides. It was in the slides. It was in the slides. It was in the. No, I'm kidding. Just try to go for an estimate, like of the 4 different values on the screen. Which one you think would be the most realistic one?
It's not 28.
It's certainly not 28, and it is 68. Well done. Well done. That's
And
exactly
is that those who know that they've been victim of a data breach, or
the ones that
so it
know
could be more.
that. That's a very good point. Very good heads up. It is indeed those that know they were the victim of a data breach, because sometimes it might happen that you have no idea. Quickly, I can provide you with a very short example of an NGO in Neuchâtel that we work with through the CyberPeace Builders program. When joining the program, we were discussing with them, well, we do think it would be a good idea you do a dark web monitoring to see if there are any kind of accounts leaked. Oh, but why would we do that? We are small, nobody knows us. Why would anybody attack us? Well, in the end, we managed to identify 21 different accounts on the dark web for them. They have a staff of 30 people, out of which 7 accounts were still active and providing potentially malicious actors with entry points into their system, because there was no 2FA activated in any case. Then they were surprised to learn this. They started to take, better cybersecurity decisions and security controls, and yeah, now they have advanced quite a lot. But it's just this idea that it doesn't matter the size of your organization, you can always be a target. Now, let's move forward to the final 2 questions, and this one is actually a scale. So on a scale from 1 to 10, how would you rate your current data protection practices in your organization?
Does that go in the scoreboard? Or?
Yeah, this is going to go in the scoreboard. We're going to have a look at this after that in just a moment to take forward the discussion. And on a scale from 1 to 10, how would you rate your organization's cybersecurity maturity / resilience? There we go. Thank you very much. Now, this is going now to provide us with a very quick podium. Chia, if you know, you know who you are. So please, I am information management now, and Loganek. Okay, so please, if that's okay with you, if you would like to kindly stand up, introduce yourselves or your organization, and tell us a bit more about your maybe data protection practices and cybersecurity practices. If you like, that would be super appreciated. And then I will give the floor back to the panelists to actually discuss a bit the main takeaways from the session and open up for questions and answers, while I'm also going to bring up the analytics for the Kahoot for these last 2 scale questions. So Loganek, I am, and Chia, please. If you like
Look, and I just put a message on the chat to say they can't speak right now, but I can read out saying, I know these things from
Perfect.
Life of Learning. I was a journalist, cinematographer, and now I'm a driver for UNHCR.
Oh.
And I was always fascinated with protecting of data, of people and their data.
Okay, awesome. Thank you very much.
Don't hesitate to add elements in the chat if you want to, Loganek.
Thank you. And guys, who would like to start?
I think.
Yeah, I will sit down because I'm too short. So yeah, hi everyone. I'm Chiara Fuso. I actually don't work for an NGO. I'm a lecturer and PhD fellow at Leiden University, and I'm working exactly on cybersecurity in humanitarian aid organizations. So that's what I can say in a nutshell. And regarding cybersecurity practices, I can approach it from a university angle, but yeah.
Eero Sario from IFRC, working on primary data collection, so all very relevant for my specific job role. Maybe just one reflection on the balancing act of cybersecurity and how to enforce it. It's like everybody wants to be compliant. Nobody wants to who works in an NGO or other organization wants to do harm, but then in the end they want to get their job done as well. So when we have some cybersecurity policies or tooling enforced on us, that this allows us to do our work in the field especially, people will find creative ways to get their job done, and then in the process of doing so might risk the operation or the data that they collect and manage to all kinds of risks. So it's something I think people who develop cybersecurity policies and tool decisions and other stuff around it really need to work with the people in the field to come up with solutions that allow them to get the work done but still be compliant.
Thank you for that. Thank you both for that intervention. Super interesting. And there is always a big debate around compliance. Like, are we compliant just for the sake of compliance, or just because we know how to do it properly and implement it properly? But this is a whole other discussion, and because there are many organizations who just get compliant just to respect legal requirements and norms, but then in practice that compliance is not seen. But it is true that it's very good to be mindful of that practice and actually the way you're going to implement it, and be aware of the tools and resources available to you. I'm going to give the floor back to all the experts, and guys, I will let you choose how you like to start. On the screen we're going to have the first scale question around what are your current data protection practices in your organization. And then secondly, we have the one regarding cybersecurity. I'm going to reshare my screen so that people online can see them as well. But yeah, I'll give the floor back to you. Thank you.
Well, I definitely relate quite strongly to what IFRC was saying just there, because I really have the impression both that there's often very complex systems set up, especially from HQs of organizations, that are completely unpractical in the field, but that help answer the sort of compliance aspects that HQs are reassured about, but that have nothing to do with reality. So this is one of the reasons why I think it's also important to make sure that the tools that are set up are properly thought through, not just from an IT point of view, but especially from a user point of view, and that the data and digital literacy side is really important. I find, based on the results that we can see on the screen, that we probably, this is not the norm. I would say we do have people who are pretty interested and involved in the topic in the room here, because if we were really to take what NGOs or nonprofits in general are, we would probably be at a scale of 2 or 3. So I'm very happy to have you all in the room, but at the same time, I would have wanted a lot of people who were rather on the scale of 2 or 3 to be here. But again, they don't feel concerned by the topic because they have the impression it's somebody else's problem and they wanted to stay like that. So it's also important to keep that in mind and try and ensure that we involve people by making the topic less scary, less compliance type approach, but really connect to their day-to-day lives and make them understand, even with like concrete examples. You were talking, Alex, earlier of like your security, your social security number being on the dark web, making them relate to what it would mean with their own data, to make them understand why it's not acceptable for beneficiary data to just be shared on an online platform with sometimes open access. I mean, I still use those in examples of trainings. I still have like accesses that are openly available online to different mobile data collection platforms where people just shared it openly when it's personal data and sometimes very sensitive information. So I've contacted about 10 different organizations telling them, you know that your data is online? And they're like, yeah, but yeah, it's not my problem. Or else, oh, but in this country, it doesn't really matter. All of our, this type of data is often shared freely. So there's also the contextual and local aspect to take into account to make sure that people understand why it's an issue. Maybe I'll leave it at that. And if you wanted to...
Maybe I can add to, also from the experience of working with our members around the world, it depends actually on the awareness of cybersecurity, and sometimes it's really like no, as you said, like we're a small NGO, it's not about us, so we'll never be attacked. So okay, we do what we can do just to be in compliance with the local legislation, and I imagine that the more you are aware, the more you will have a lower scale, let's say, because you are aware that no, but here and here, I'm not really, I'm not really like well developed in terms of data protection. And sometimes it's really true. Like if it's like 7 or 8, it's already a good start when you already took some measures to protect better your data. So you, of course, like it's good to you, but sometimes I think it's you like we underestimate the cyber attacks, and yeah. So I think the idea of being aware of cyber attacks and in general cybersecurity, and have this idea of doing no harm is really like important, and it will help you to then become better in data protection.
Giulio, would you like also to add something on this from your side?
I find it hard to comment on even on my own organization when it comes to data protection practices, just because it's so contingent and dependent on practices across different parts and branches. So that's also why I don't. Yeah, what I can say is, so for example, as Access Now, we do have variable level of risk depending on a threat model faced by different people. So there are parts of Access Now that are like much more exposed, including, for example, the helpline. That is the part of the house that helps human rights activists and individuals at risk in communities to protect their digital rights in a concrete manner. So they are much more exposed to digital risk than others. So it really depends in a way on how the practices are balanced, and how do you strengthen security on one side while keeping the agility on the other part of the house, while keeping the overall I would say organic and holistic strategy together, while keeping it together. What I think is, it might resonate with a lot of the audience, is that they possibly don't even know, because I didn't know. When I was with an NGO, when I was working with different organizations, you don't really know, because you don't know what rules apply to the other parts of the house. So I would say that one interesting takeaway from me from from this poll is that there is very few no answer, because honestly, I would expect much more. So my reflection is that either we project what we know to the rest of the organization, or everybody in this meeting is extremely well aware about how the organization is managing all data practices and all structure across branches and across countries. So that's one thing that we'll invite in reflection on, in terms of maybe it would be good to reflect in terms of, from the organizational side, to be more transparent about how these strategies are implemented across the board.
Thank you. Thank you, Giulio.
Yeah, just want to maybe to finish on that. Fully agree with Giulio. You need to know where you stand in your different organization in terms of cybersecurity. There is different way to do that. There is enough assessment online. You can find one on cpp.ngo. We have our own assessment, but you need to know where you start. And then the best practices to put in place is turn on MFA in all your organization. So many times we saw basic cybersecurity challenges due to the fact that people didn't turn on MFA, so multi-factor authentication. There is a lot of data leak. People get credential, login, password, but if you don't have this extra level of security, people are simply able to access different database and critical information. That's the first point. The second point is train your staff. I mean, that was said all along this workshop. You need to train your staff in a funny way. You mean you cannot expect people to love cybersecurity if you just kill them with PowerPoint. So you need to find different way of engaging with your staff on cybersecurity. Make game, make contest, make quiz, whatever, but you need to engage them. Cybersecurity should become a culture into your organization. And the last point is never forget you're not alone. We are all trying to fight the same challenges, the same issue in cybersecurity, in data protection, wherever. So ask for help. Don't feel you're alone in your world. There is a lot of different people outside that already face the same issue. So discuss with your peers or look for organizations that can help you. And I think there's plenty of them today around. We have booths below. So don't hesitate. Reach out to us if you need any help or support. Thank you.
And if I can just add, we didn't mention at all, if we're still talking about cybersecurity, the ICRC cybersecurity attack that occurred end of 2019, beginning of 2020. And that's, for me, really an example of how you should manage a cybersecurity situation. And I think if they had not had the resources that they had internally in terms of IT and cybersecurity, to just know that it was happening, like in another organization, they wouldn't even have known that they'd been through a cybersecurity hack. And they were extremely open in the way they managed this. They actually, it cost them a huge lot of money to actually stop operations for a few weeks until they'd actually figured out what it meant. And obviously, all organizations don't have such resources. But if you want a good example of what to do in case of a hack and to understand the risks that it can entail, I really encourage you to check out all the information about that specific data breach online.
Thank you, Maev. And yes, that's a very good example and also a good, let's say, learning source. The way they handled the attack, the way they communicated around it, how they, try to establish a connection with the attackers. But all this is online. And also don't forget that dark web price index, which is quite shocking when you see it at first. You're like, oh, a copy of a passport, it's only $50 or even less. Or it depends really from the country or the country itself. But depending on the country, that, for example, a Russian passport can be around like $30 and so on. But you have all this information online. Now it's your turn. We would really like to hear from you. We still have, I would say, 10 minutes, but we would really like to get your questions. Yeah, sir.
Hi, Volker from Danish Refugee Council. The issue from the second presentation, I think, about the demands from donors and UN agencies for data sets, right? Because data sets are so easy and they say, just send us the beneficiary database so we can verify that you have actually, whatever they needed to verify. It's also increasing in our experience coming then through third-party monitoring companies, through audit companies, etc., etc. So it's cascading down. And those demands are really hard to manage. At the same time, both donors and UN agencies should really be committed to these principles and minimizing data sharing. And we have had situations where we offered to see the data on site, for example, with auditors, instead of sharing the database to do verifications. But it's becoming increasingly harder. So do you know of any inroads we can make collectively in like changing minds there in the leadership and maybe donors coming together and being more principled? Thanks.
Thank you for the question. Giulio, do you have some initial answers for this, and then we can do a tour de table? Thank you.
I think by the way, I would love to hear the feedback from Maev about that, because I think that came up quite often during the trainings that were done on the topic. So I'll keep it very short to let her talk. My 2 cents and my main argument on this has been that the sector has been extremely stupid in dealing with this topic. I think we have been not coming together as humanitarian organizations to push back and to say, you donor, you third-party auditor, you third-party organization, you monitoring organization, you want those data sets. First of all, you need to prove that you need it. You need to prove that you can protect those data. You need to prove that you respond to data minimization and you are not going to make me cause a breach. So we are, in a way, as a sector, we are dealing with this issue in a scattered individual way, not coming together, not adopting common standards in terms of what does it mean to share data with donors? What does it mean to share data with third parties that are not operationally oriented on the backend side. And the reason very often is because these two sides do not communicate. So the actors come from the back, they pick up the bag and they go away. And the people that are in the front collecting the data don't even know. So my 2 cents is that we should educate leadership, not the bottom level, but the leadership on those issues, on those risks, tell them to come together, get their stuff together, and put up policies that are shared across the sector and agree with donors common standards on when, why, and how can and should that data be shared. Maiev, back to you.
Thanks, Giulio. It was definitely one of the biggest issues that we saw, like with those 12 humanitarian NGOs. And I think in terms of leadership, as Giulio was saying, there's also a big issue in terms of disconnect between HQs of UN organizations and field ones. And where I agree with most of what you're saying, Giulio, I feel that it's also local issues that exist, because a lot of UN agencies have in the past 5-10 years built guidance, principles, and I was talking as an intro also of the Responsible Data Working Group. There's the incredible YASC resources, guidance notes in particular on data sharing with donors and such. That's really a great resource. And so often you have these big policies at HQ, and in the field, the relation between the donor and NGOs is much more delicate. And it's sort of a power game also, where data becomes a key aspect of the relationship, and NGOs try to push back as much as they can. Most of the time they do, sometimes they don't, and so they end up sharing data that they shouldn't. Also because they don't always have the right understanding of what can be done. And there's loads of stuff in terms of like asking for a sample of a database that's to be shared for audit purposes. So really a bit like Giulio was saying, fine-tuning a bit why the data is needed and then how it's shared to minimize as much as possible the data. And sometimes you can actually share data that is completely anonymized, depending on the type of need you're trying to answer. So a lot of the discussions with humanitarian NGOs was trying to build that common front also, so that NGOs not only have a common position on this, but that they also confront the local entities of the donor with their official policies, because you can see, I mean, the biggest debates often are around UNHCR today on these topics, also because of the sensitivity of the data, and there's loads of questioning situations that have been talked about, be it the Rohingya crisis, also around Lebanon in the past year or so. And in these particular cases, it's also a question of, I mean, when you look at the data policies of UNHCR and HQ, they're great. So it's just a question of them actually being followed and sort of encouraging the local entity to make sure that they encourage their local donor to actually follow the policy that they're supposed to follow.
Thank you for the question again. I hope the answers were answering your,
We're
and
not
Giulio,
alone.
Maiev. Any other questions? Yes, please.
Yeah, I'm involved in a session tomorrow about how more inclusivity around data can help better humanitarian service delivery or protection. And one of the things that we encounter is people say, I'm just not asking the question. It's too insensitive. And what if the data leaks? So for us, there's a real challenge, because the perception of the risk means people just don't want to go there. But the result of that is that there are sections of the community that don't benefit or don't benefit equally. So I was really heartwarmed that you didn't say don't collect data about personal characteristics or, you know, sensitive religion, ethnicity, language. But I mean, what would you say if people say that to us tomorrow? What would you say in response?
And I just don't want to take all the floor, but it's really a question of analyzing your local context. There will be cases where I would say, if you do your risk analysis, your data protection impact assessment, and you realize that usually inclusivity data might not always be the most sensitive data there is. So if you're collecting sensitive data anyway on, I don't know, protection, migration, and such, the extra inclusivity thing, be it in terms of like health issues, be it in terms of gender, they might not be much more sensitive than the other data that you're collecting. So in those cases, if they're really relevant for your programs, of course you should continue collecting them. But you also need to consider one of the best examples that I have of a situation where people thought that they were collecting data that wasn't sensitive and ended up being very sensitive. I'm not sure in which Southern African country it was, but one where homosexuality is outlawed. And you had data just of a list of presents at a workshop around AIDS that was shared with the government. And the government just took this list of presents and put everybody in prison. Like, this is a real situation. And it was just a list of presents, names and all, but the association between AIDS awareness raising workshop and homosexuality was seen as automatic by the government. So it will always be very contextual, and there's no black and white answer on this, but you do need to really analyze the risks that you may have in the country where there's so many situations where, in terms of human rights, in the past 5 years, data protection laws that have been set up in national contexts are not protecting the rights of the citizens. They're rather there to get more information and data surveillance, as we were talking of earlier. So in those types of context, obviously what you're collecting might become very sensitive. And even in some like Central American states, there are places where a lot of NGOs decide not to collect data because or try and collect aggregated data, because they know otherwise that if they don't do like community level type support, the government will try and get a hand on the personal data, and you don't know what the consequences will be on the people. So it's always a very fine balance, and it does require looking into a proper data protection impact assessment whenever you're in these types of relatively risky situations.
Yes, please. Yeah.
Thank you. Yeah, I just wanted to come back on the poll. I think those figures that are not really, I don't think they're representative of our sector. As you mentioned, it's either that the people who are answering are not aware of the risk, or they are siloed in their own systems that seem to be data protection aware. Often what we see is that at HQ level, we have systems that are super well protected and have MFA and all of that, but they are not necessarily, those systems are not necessarily containing personal data about beneficiaries. But when it comes to actual beneficiary data, it's treated at the field level where there is really lack of proper systems that protect them. So my question, maybe there is no answer to it, how do we strike a balance between digitization to actually improve protection of beneficiary data, and digitizing which actually puts that beneficiary data at risk? So is it like, yeah, digitizing would improve the security of the data, but at the same time, digitizing puts the data at harm. So in a world that with like raising data breaches, what do you think is the balance? How do we get there? And I'm Zina from NRC.
Thank you, Zina. Thank you for the question. Yeah.
It's a super good point. I think I go back a bit to the comment we had before from IFRC. It's all the question of co-designing headquarters activity with the field. Because too much time, you hire at the headquarter experts on the topics. They are super proud to come with the last technology, the last idea, etc. But it's never applicable on the ground. So really the best you can do in my head for that is that working closely with the ground, with the field, to understand what are they need, what they are collecting this data, how they use it, and then what are the constraints. You give the example of MFA, how many times you have organizations that say, oh, we just send an SMS MFA, and then on the field you don't get any reception, so you can never connect. So all these kind of small particularities are quite interesting, and back at the time at ICRC, I was always pushing to have the team developing the solution go in the field and going out of the headquarters to visit, to understand what are the constraints on the ground. So that could be one way to help a bit the challenges, but definitely not the full answer.
Yeah, I maybe can add to this one because exactly I'm also the representative of an HQ, and yes, it's just I completely agree with Fabien. It's just to be in touch with those who are working directly with beneficiaries, and probably I think it's exactly it is a responsibility of the HQ to raise awareness, to conduct different analysis, surveys, and so on. So really like know better those people. And exactly, sometimes it's not even about knowing the organizations with who you work, but or in our case as a membership organization, but it's also about knowing the people themselves who are working with these beneficiaries. So yeah, I would say it is exactly the responsibility of the HQ, and it's up to us to conduct research, conduct analysis, and share the data, share the information, the analysis, yeah, data, and yeah, just try to unify all the requirements that you have in your organization, or you have already, you learn how to do it better in the HQ. So share this experience, share these best practices with your members or with your representatives on the field.
Thank you. Thank you very much for all your participation, your questions, and also the answers and the insights that you shared during the panel. Do not hesitate to reach out to us. Each organization has their own like LinkedIn, social media website. Please do come and ask us, speak to us after this panel. As Fabien mentioned, we all have booths downstairs on the ground floor. And yeah, thank you very much. And I hope we stay in touch. Cheers. Thank you.